Sarah Martinez had grown accustomed to the sideways glances and hushed whispers that followed her through the corridors of the Naval Operations Center. At 24, she was the youngest civilian contractor in the building's history, and her oversized glasses, untamed curly hair, and preference for comfortable sneakers over heels made her stand out like a lighthouse in a sea of pressed uniforms and polished shoes. "There goes the tech support girl," she heard Lieutenant Commander Harrison mutter to his colleague as she passed by with her laptop bag slung across her shoulder. The words stung, but Sarah had learned to keep her head high and her focus sharp. She had work to do, and despite what others thought, that work was more important than they could possibly imagine. The morning started like any other at the Norfolk Naval Base in Virginia. Sarah arrived at 0630 hours, 30 minutes before her official start time, clutching a large coffee and a bagel from the commissary. The security guard at the entrance had stopped asking for her ID weeks ago, though she still wore her contractor badge prominently on her faded band t-shirt. "Morning, Sarah," called out Petty Officer Johnson from behind the front desk. He was one of the few people who treated her like a human being rather than an inconvenience or a curiosity. "Ready for another day of making our computers actually work?" Sarah managed to smile. "Someone has to keep you all from breaking them," she replied, though her voice carried more weariness than humor. The truth was, she was tired. Tired of being dismissed, tired of having her expertise questioned, and tired of being seen as nothing more than the girl who fixed email problems and reset passwords. She made her way to the basement level, where her small office was tucked away between the server room and a storage closet filled with outdated equipment. The Navy had given her the space 6 months ago when they realized their IT problems required more than the occasional visit from their contracted support company. What they hadn't realized was that they were getting someone whose skills went far beyond basic technical support. Sarah had graduated summa cum laude from MIT with dual degrees in computer science and electrical engineering. She had been recruited by 3 major tech companies before she was even out of college, but something about working with the military had appealed to her sense of purpose. Her father had served in the Army, and she had grown up with stories of service and sacrifice. When the opportunity to work as a civilian contractor with the Navy had presented itself, she had jumped at the chance. The reality, however, had been far different from her expectations. Instead of working on cutting-edge defense systems or contributing to national security in meaningful ways, she found herself troubleshooting printer issues, explaining how to use basic software to officers who seemed to view technology as a necessary evil, and being treated like an accessory rather than a professional. Her office was barely large enough for a desk, 2 chairs, and the multiple monitors she had requisitioned for her work. The walls were covered with network diagrams, system flowcharts, and printouts of code that she had been analyzing in her spare time. Most people who glanced into her office saw chaos, but Sarah saw patterns, connections, and possibilities. As she settled in her chair and powered up her workstation, her phone rang. The caller ID showed it was coming from Admiral Richardson's office, and Sarah's stomach dropped. Call from flag officers were never routine requests for password resets. "Ms. Martinez, this is Commander Patricia Wells from Admiral Richardson's staff. The Admiral needs to see you in his office immediately. There's been an incident." Sarah's mind raced as she grabbed her laptop and headed for the elevator. Admiral Richardson was the base commander, a man whose reputation for no-nonsense leadership and strategic thinking was known throughout the Navy. She had never been in the same room as him, let alone spoken to him directly. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like it lasted hours, though it was probably less than 2 minutes. When the doors opened, she was greeted by Commander Wells, a stern-looking woman with perfectly arranged hair and a uniform that looked like it had been pressed minutes earlier. "Follow me," Wells said without preamble, leading Sarah down a hallway lined with portraits of previous commanders and display cases filled with naval memorabilia. The carpet was thick enough to muffle their footsteps, and Sarah found herself unconsciously adjusting her posture and trying to smooth down her unruly hair. Admiral Richardson's office was larger than Sarah's entire basement workspace. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the harbor, where several destroyers were moored alongside the pier. The Admiral himself was standing behind his desk, his phone pressed to his ear, his face grave with concentration. He was younger than Sarah had expected, probably in his early 50s, with graying hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. His uniform was immaculate, with rows of ribbons that spoke to decades of distinguished service. When he hung up the phone and turned his attention to her, Sarah felt like a deer in headlights. "Ms. Martinez," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Thank you for coming so quickly. Please have a seat." Sarah perched nervously on the edge of one of the leather chairs facing his desk, her laptop balanced on her knees. Admiral Richardson remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back as he began to pace. "What I'm about to tell you is classified," he began, his eyes fixed on something beyond the window. "This morning at 0400 hours, our Pacific Fleet experienced what can only be described as a coordinated cyber attack. Multiple ships lost communication capabilities simultaneously. Navigation systems went offline. Weapons targeting computers crashed across the board." Sarah's blood ran cold. A cyber attack on naval vessels wasn't just a technical problem. It was a national security crisis that could leave ships vulnerable and sailors in danger. "Our best IT specialists are baffled," the Admiral continued, finally turning to face her. "The attack was sophisticated, using methods that our current security protocols weren't designed to detect or prevent. Commander Wells tells me that you have experience beyond basic technical support. I need to know exactly what that means." Sarah took a deep breath, realizing that this was either her moment to step up or her chance to disappoint yet another superior officer who had underestimated her capabilities. "Sir," she began, her voice steadier than she felt, "my background is in cybersecurity and advanced network analysis. Before I took this position, I spent 2 years working with a private firm that specialized in penetration testing and vulnerability assessment for government contractors. I've also been monitoring some unusual network traffic patterns on the base systems for the past several weeks." Admiral Richardson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Go on." "I noticed anomalous data packets moving through our network at irregular intervals. They were designed to look like routine system updates, but the patterns were wrong. The timing, the source codes, the encryption methods, they all suggested that someone was probing our defenses, learning our protocols. And you reported this to whom?" Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I tried to bring it to the attention of the IT department supervisor, but he told me to stick to fixing printers and not worry about things above my pay grade." The Admiral's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Show me what you found." Sarah opened her laptop and navigated to a folder she had created to document her observations. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she pulled up network logs, traffic analysis charts, and code samples she had captured during her investigation. "Here," she said, turning the laptop toward the Admiral. These packets were coming in through what appear to be legitimate software update channels, but if you look at the metadata and compare it to known update signatures, you can see discrepancies. Someone was using our own update systems against us. Admiral Richardson leaned forward, studying the screen with the intensity of someone who understood that technical details could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. "How long would it take you to trace the source of these intrusions?" "If I had access to the Pacific Fleet's network logs and the authority to dig deeper into the base systems, I could have preliminary results within hours. But, sir, I should mention that I've been working on this analysis in my spare time because I believe it was important. I haven't been officially assigned to cybersecurity duties." "You are now," the Admiral said without hesitation. "Commander Wells will get you whatever access you need. I'm authorizing you to work directly with our communications team and to interface with Pacific Fleet cybersecurity personnel. This is now your highest priority." Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of excitement and terror at the responsibility being placed on her shoulders. "Yes, sir. I'll need access to classified network segments and real-time monitoring capabilities." "Done. What else?" "I'd like to set up a secure workspace where I can analyze the data without risk of further compromise. And, sir, if this attack was as sophisticated as you're describing, the perpetrators likely planted additional backdoors that haven't been activated yet. We need to assume that our current communications are potentially compromised." Admiral Richardson nodded grimly. "Anything else?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, then decided that honesty was more important than political correctness. "Sir, if you want this investigation to be successful, I need to be treated as a cybersecurity specialist, not as the tech support girl. I need the authority to access systems, question personnel, and make recommendations without having my expertise questioned at every turn." The Admiral's expression was unreadable for a long moment. Then, to Sarah's surprise, he smiled slightly. "Ms. Martinez, as of this moment, You report directly to me. Anyone who has a problem with your methods or your authority can take it up with me personally. Clear. Crystal clear, sir. Good. Now, let's figure out who's been playing games with my ships. As Sarah left the Admiral's office with a new security clearance authorization and a direct phone line to the command center, she felt like she was walking into a different world. For the first time since she had started working at the base, people were looking at her with something other than dismissal or condescension. Word had already begun to spread that she was working on something important, something classified, something that had the Admiral's personal attention. But as she set up her new workspace in a secure conference room equipped with multiple monitors and direct lines to the Pacific Fleet, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were already behind in a game whose rules they didn't fully understand. The cyber attack on the ships had been a demonstration of power, a warning shot across the bow. The real attack was still coming. She opened her analysis software and began diving into the network logs that were already streaming in from the affected vessels. The data painted a picture of an adversary that was patient, methodical, and frighteningly sophisticated. They hadn't just attacked the Navy's systems. They had studied them, learned from them, and turned them against themselves. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself lost in the digital forensics work that she had trained for, but never had the opportunity to use at this level. Every piece of code she analyzed, every network pathway she traced, and every vulnerability she uncovered brought her closer to understanding not just what had happened, but what was being planned. The attackers had left breadcrumbs, whether intentionally or by accident. They had used techniques that were advanced but not perfect, methods that were sophisticated but not flawless. And Sarah was beginning to see patterns that suggested something much larger than a simple cyber attack. Someone was mapping the Navy's entire digital infrastructure, learning not just how to break it, but how to control it. And if they succeeded, the implications would extend far beyond a few ships losing communication. They would have the ability to compromise every vessel, every base, and every operation that relied on the network Sarah was now tasked with protecting. As evening approached, and the base began to quiet down around her, Sarah continued working by the light of her monitors, surrounded by printouts and notes that represented the beginning of what she suspected would be the most important investigation of her career. She had gone from being dismissed as the tech support girl to being trusted with national security in the span of a single day. Now she had to prove that the Admiral's faith in her hadn't been misplaced, and that she could find and stop an enemy that was already inside their systems, watching, waiting, and preparing for something much worse than what they had already done. The coffee had long since grown cold in the cup beside Sarah's keyboard, but she barely noticed. It was 3 a.m, and she had been working for nearly 20 hours straight, her eyes burning from staring at screens filled with code, network diagrams, and data streams that told a story more frightening than any thriller she had ever read. The secure conference room had become her war room, with whiteboards covered in her handwritten notes, multiple monitors displaying different aspects of the ongoing analysis, and a growing pile of printed reports that documented what was shaping up to be the most sophisticated cyber attack in naval history. Her phone buzzed with another message from Admiral Richardson, who seemed to require even less sleep than she did. Status update? Sarah stretched her aching back and typed her response. Found the entry point. It's worse than we thought. They've been inside our systems for at least 6 months. Request meeting at 0600. The reply came back almost immediately. Granted. Conference room B on level 3. Bring everything. Sarah looked around at the chaos of papers, cables, and equipment that had accumulated over the past day. Everything was going to require some serious organization, but the Admiral needed to understand the full scope of what they were facing. She had traced the attack back to its origins, following digital breadcrumbs through servers in 17 different countries. The attackers had been methodical and patient, establishing their presence in the Navy's networks gradually, learning the systems from the inside out before making their move. But it was what she had discovered about their current capabilities that had kept her awake all night. They weren't just inside the Pacific Fleet systems. They had access to communications networks, supply chain management systems, personnel databases, and even some classified operational planning documents. As dawn broke over Norfolk Naval Base, Sarah gathered her materials and made her way to the third-floor conference room. She arrived to find not just Admiral Richardson waiting for her, but 3 other flag officers she didn't recognize, along with Commander Wells and two men in civilian clothes who had federal agent written all over them. Ms. Martinez, Admiral Richardson said as she entered, "Allow me to introduce Admiral Chun from Pacific Fleet Command, Admiral Jackson from Naval Intelligence, and Admiral Foster from Cyber Command. These gentlemen from the FBI are Agent Rodriguez and Agent Thompson." Sarah felt a moment of intimidation facing such high-ranking officials, but she reminded herself that she was here because she had found answers that no one else had been able to find. She set down her laptop and organized her papers on the conference table. "Gentlemen," she began, "what we're dealing with isn't just a cyber attack. It's a comprehensive intelligence operation that has been running for months. The attacks on the Pacific Fleet yesterday were just the opening move." She connected her laptop to the room's display system and brought up a network diagram that showed the extent of the intrusion. Red lines indicated compromised systems, and there were far more red lines than anyone in the room had expected. "They call themselves Ghost Fleet," Sarah continued, "based on communications I've intercepted. The name appears in several encrypted messages that I was able to decrypt using patterns identified in their code. They've established what essentially amounts to a shadow network running parallel to our official systems." Admiral Chen leaned forward, his expression grave. "Are you telling us they have access to operational data from my ships?" "Yes, sir. But it's more specific than that." Sarah clicked to another screen showing intercepted communications. "They've been monitoring fleet movements, mapping standard patrol routes, and identifying patterns in deployment schedules. They know where your ships are going to be before your own crew members do." The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning system. Agent Rodriguez was the first to speak. "How is that possible? These systems should be isolated from external networks." Sarah had anticipated this question. "They're using a technique called air gap bridging. Essentially, they've compromised systems that have legitimate reasons to connect to both classified and unclassified networks. When someone transfers a file or sends an email through these bridge systems, they're unknowingly carrying malicious code between networks that should be separate." She pulled up another diagram showing the data flow. "Think of it like this. If you have a person who works in both a secure facility and a regular office, and they carry a briefcase between the two locations, someone could hide something in that briefcase without the carrier knowing about it." Admiral Foster from Cyber Command nodded grimly. "We've theorized about this kind of attack, but we've never seen it implemented at this scale. What's their endgame?" Sarah took a deep breath. This was the part that had kept her awake, the discovery that had made her hands shake as she uncovered it piece by piece. "Based on the data I've analyzed, they're preparing for something called Operation Darkwater. I found references to it in encrypted files that were stored on compromised servers. The operation appears to be designed to simultaneously disable naval communications and navigation systems across multiple fleets, not just in the Pacific." She clicked to a timeline that she had constructed from the digital evidence. "They've been testing their capabilities in small doses. The incidents over the past few months that were attributed to system glitches or routine malfunctions, the communication blackouts, the navigation errors, the targeting system failures, those weren't random. They were tests." Admiral Richardson's face had gone pale. "How many incidents?" 47 that I can identify with certainty, probably more that were so brief or minor that they weren't officially reported." Sarah's voice grew more urgent as she continued. "But here's the critical part. Based on the pattern of testing and the communications I've intercepted, I believe Operation Darkwater is scheduled to begin within the next 72 hours. Agent Thompson spoke up. "Do you have any indication of who's behind this? Nation-state actors? Criminal organization?" "The techniques and resources required suggest state-level capabilities," Sarah replied. "But they've been very careful to hide their origins. The attack infrastructure spans multiple countries and appears to use compromised civilian systems as well as military targets. However, I did find something interesting." She pulled up a code analysis screen showing fragments of programming language. "Buried deep in their malware, I found comments and variable names written in what appears to be Mandarin Chinese. It could be misdirection, but combined with the sophistication and scale of the operation, it suggests we're dealing with a major adversarial nation." The room erupted in quiet, but intense conversation between the admirals. Sarah waited, knowing that the implications of what she had discovered were still sinking in. Admiral Richardson called for order. "Ms. Martinez, what do you need to stop this?" "Honestly, sir, stopping it completely may not be possible at this point. They're too deeply embedded, and they've had too much time to prepare. but we can minimize the damage and potentially turn the tables on them. She clicked to her final presentation slide, which outlined her recommended response plan. I need a team of analysts who can work around the clock to identify every compromised system and every piece of malware they've planted. We need to coordinate with all fleet commands to implement emergency communication protocols that bypass the compromised systems. And we need to do this without alerting the attackers that we know about their plans. Admiral Chun looked skeptical. You're talking about coordinating across multiple fleets, involving hundreds of ships and thousands of personnel, all while maintaining operational security. That's a massive undertaking. Yes, sir, it is. But I have an idea that might give us an advantage they're not expecting. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard, bringing up a new diagram that showed a proposed counteroperation. Instead of just defending against their attack, we can use their own network against them. I've identified several key servers in their command structure that we could potentially access using the same backdoors they've been using against us. Agent Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. You're talking about conducting an offensive cyber operation. That's beyond the scope of what a civilian contractor should be involved in. Sarah felt a flash of the old frustration, but Admiral Richardson intervened before she could respond. Agent Rodriguez, this young woman has uncovered more actionable intelligence in 24 hours than our combined agencies have produced in months. I suggest we listen to what she has to say. Thank you, sir. Sarah turned her attention back to her presentation. I'm not suggesting that I personally conduct any offensive operations, but I can provide the technical analysis and targeting information that would allow properly authorized personnel to take action. The key is timing. We need to move before they realize we've discovered their plans. Admiral Foster was studying the counter-operation proposal intently. This is incredibly risky. If we move against their infrastructure and fail, we could trigger their attack prematurely. We might also escalate this beyond the cyber domain. With respect, sir, Sarah replied, doing nothing isn't really an option. They're going to launch their attack regardless of what we do. Our choice is whether to face it blind and helpless or to hit them first and disrupt their coordination. Commander Wells, who had been silent throughout most of the briefing, finally spoke up. Ms. Martinez, how confident are you in your analysis? We're talking about actions that could have significant diplomatic and military consequences. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She thought about all the times she had been dismissed, all the occasions when her expertise had been questioned, all the moments when she had been treated as nothing more than the tech support girl. But she also thought about the sailors on those ships who were depending on systems that had been compromised, about the families who would suffer if Operation Darkwater succeeded. Commander Wells, I'm as confident as anyone can be when dealing with this level of complexity. I've triple-checked my analysis, cross-referenced it with multiple sources, and tested my conclusions against alternative theories. The evidence is clear. We are facing an imminent and comprehensive cyber attack that will cripple our naval capabilities if we don't act. Admiral Richardson stood up, his decision made. Ms. Martinez, you have 12 hours to prepare a detailed technical brief for Cyber Command. Agent Rodriguez, I want the FBI working with our intelligence people to verify the foreign connections she's identified. Admiral Chun, start preparing your fleet commanders for emergency communication protocols. He paused, looking around the room at the assembled officers and agents. Ladies and gentlemen, as of this moment, we are in a state of cyber warfare. We're going to find these people, stop their attack, and make sure they understand that the United States Navy doesn't make an easy target. As the meeting broke up and the various officials hurried off to implement the emergency response, Sarah found herself alone with Admiral Richardson. He walked over to the window, looking out at the harbor where the morning sun was reflecting off the hulls of the ships moored at the pier. You know, he said quietly, when I called you into my office yesterday, I was expecting to hear that we had a routine security breach that could be handled with standard protocols. Yes, sir. I imagine this isn't what you had in mind. He turned back to face her. Ms. Martinez, in 30 years of naval service, I've learned to recognize when someone has the combination of skills, dedication, and courage that makes the difference between mission success and mission failure. What you've accomplished in the past 24 hours is extraordinary. Sarah felt a warmth that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with validation. Thank you, sir. But we're not done yet. No, we're not. And that's why I'm making some changes to your status here. You're being reassigned to a new position in our cybersecurity division with a security clearance upgrade and a significant increase in authority. You'll be working directly with me on this and any similar threats that emerge." Sarah blinked in surprise. "Sir, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for that level of responsibility." Admiral Richardson smiled, the first time she had seen him look anything other than grave since their first meeting. "Ms. Martinez, 12 hours ago you were the tech support girl who fixed printers and reset passwords. Now you're the person who discovered a cyber warfare operation that could have crippled the Pacific Fleet. I think you're ready for more responsibility than you realize." As Sarah gathered her materials and prepared to dive back into the technical analysis that would guide the Navy's response to Operation Darkwater, she reflected on how completely her world had changed in less than 2 days. She had gone from being overlooked and underestimated to being trusted with some of the most sensitive national security information in the country. But more than that, she had found her purpose. This was why she had wanted to work with the military in the first place. Not to fix printers and explain email, but to use her skills to protect the people who risk their lives to protect everyone else. The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time since she had started working at the base, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The next 36 hours passed in a blur of caffeine, code analysis, and coordinated chaos as Sarah found herself at the center of the largest cybersecurity operation in naval history. Her new workspace had been moved to a high-security facility 20 miles from the base, where she worked alongside a hastily assembled team of military cyber specialists, FBI analysts, and NSA cryptographers. The facility, known simply as the bunker to those who work there, was buried 3 stories underground and designed to withstand both physical and electronic attacks. Sarah's team had been given an entire floor with workstations that connected to isolated networks, secure communication lines, to fleet commands around the world, and access to analytical tools that she had only dreamed of using. But despite the upgraded surroundings and resources, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Her analysis of the intercepted communications had revealed that Operation Darkwater was now less than 48 hours away, and the attackers had begun activating previously dormant malware throughout the Navy systems. "Sarah, you need to see this," called out Lieutenant Commander Mike Torres, a naval intelligence officer who had been assigned to her team. He was one of the few people who had immediately treated her as an expert rather than an outsider, and his respect for her capabilities had helped smooth her integration into the military cybersecurity community. She hurried over to his workstation, where multiple screens showed network traffic patterns from various naval installations around the world. "What am I looking at?" "Communication spikes," Torres replied, pointing to a series of graphs that showed data transmission volumes over the past 12 hours. "Every compromised system we've identified is suddenly becoming much more active. They're not just maintaining their presence anymore. They're actively downloading operational data." Sarah studied the patterns, her mind racing through the implications. They're pulling everything they can before they launch the attack. Intelligence on current deployments, maintenance schedules, crew rosters, supply chain information. They want to maximize the chaos when they strike. "That's what we figured too. But here's the really concerning part." Torres switched to a different display that showed a map of global naval operations. The data they're pulling correlates directly with ships and facilities that are scheduled for major operations over the next week. They're not just planning to disrupt our systems. They're planning to disrupt specific missions. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Show me the correlation analysis." Torres pulled up a detailed comparison between the data that had been accessed by the attackers and the operational schedules that were stored in various classified planning systems. The correlation was nearly perfect. Every ship, every facility, and every operation that was critical to upcoming missions had been specifically targeted for intelligence gathering. "Mike, this isn't just about proving they can attack our systems. They're trying to compromise specific operations. Do we know what missions are scheduled for this week?" Torres hesitated. "That's above my clearance level, but Admiral Richardson has been briefed. Based on his reaction, it's significant." Sarah's secure phone rang, displaying Admiral Richardson's direct line. She answered immediately. "Ms. Martinez, I need you and Commander Torres in the main briefing room immediately. We've received new intelligence that changes everything." The main briefing room was larger than any space Sarah had worked in during her time at the base, with a conference table that could seat 30 people and wall displays that currently showed a world map dotted with red markers indicating compromised systems and yellow markers showing planned operations. Admiral Richardson was there, along with the same group of flag officers from the previous meeting, but now they were joined by several people Sarah didn't recognize, including a woman in civilian clothes who carried herself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to dealing with classified information at the highest levels. Ms. Martinez, Commander Torres, Admiral Richardson began, "I'd like you to meet Deputy Director Morgan from the CIA. She has some information that puts your discoveries in a much broader context." Deputy Director Morgan stepped forward, activating a secure presentation system. "What you've uncovered isn't just an attack on naval systems. Based on our human intelligence sources, Operation Darkwater is the opening phase of a larger plan called Pacific Dominance. The cyber attack is designed to blind and disable our naval forces in the Pacific, just as our adversaries launch coordinated military operations in the South China Sea." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "You're saying this is the prelude to actual combat operations?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. Our sources indicate that within hours of launching the cyber attack, hostile forces plan to move against several disputed territories, calculating that our compromised communications and navigation systems will prevent an effective response." Admiral Chun, who had been silent until now, spoke up grimly. "Which means they're not just trying to embarrass us or steal information. They're trying to eliminate us as a factor in regional operations while they reshape the strategic balance in the Pacific." Deputy Director Morgan nodded. "The timeline you've established for Operation Darkwater correlates exactly with intelligence we've received about military preparations by hostile forces. Ships moving into position, aircraft being repositioned, and diplomatic communications that suggest something significant is about to happen." Sarah's mind was racing through the implications. If that's true, then our counter-operation becomes even more critical. We're not just defending against a cyber attack. We're potentially preventing the opening moves of a larger conflict. "Precisely," Admiral Richardson said, "which is why I'm authorizing you to move forward with the offensive cyber operation you outlined yesterday. But the timeline has been compressed. You have 18 hours to implement your plan." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. 18 hours to conduct a cyber operation that could determine the outcome of a potential military conflict. It was the kind of pressure that could paralyze someone, but instead, she felt a clarity of purpose that surprised her. "Sir, I'll need direct access to Cyber Command's operational assets and authorization to coordinate with international partners. If we're going to disrupt their network before they can launch Darkwater, we need to hit them from multiple angles simultaneously." Admiral Foster from Cyber Command stepped forward. "You'll have everything you need. But understand, once we start this operation, there's no going back. We'll be crossing lines that could have significant geopolitical consequences." "With respect, Admiral," Sarah replied, "they crossed those lines 6 months ago when they started infiltrating our systems. We're just evening the odds." The next few hours were a frenzy of preparation as Sarah worked with cyber warfare specialists to plan and coordinate the most complex offensive cyber operation in naval history. Her analysis of the attackers' network infrastructure had identified 17 critical servers that formed the backbone of their command and control system. By simultaneously targeting these servers, they could potentially blind the attackers and disrupt their ability to coordinate the Darkwater operation. But the technical challenges were immense. Each target required different approaches, different tools, and different timing. Some could be attacked directly through network vulnerabilities that Sarah had identified. Others required more subtle approaches, using the attacker's own backdoors against them. And a few would require coordination with international partners who had access to infrastructure in other countries. Sarah found herself working more closely with military cyber specialists than she had ever imagined possible when she first started fixing printers 6 months earlier. These were people who spoke her language, who understood the technical complexities involved, and who treated her as an equal partner in the operation rather than an outsider who needed to be managed. Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer Hayes, the lead operational planner from Cyber Command, had become Sarah's primary partner in developing the attack plan. She was a career military officer with 15 years of experience in information warfare, but she readily acknowledged that Sarah's analysis and understanding of the specific threat they faced was superior to anything her team had produced. "Sarah," she said as they reviewed the final operational plan, "I want you to understand something. What you've accomplished here goes far beyond technical analysis. You've potentially changed the strategic balance in one of the most important regions of the world. Sarah looked up from the laptop, where she was making final adjustments to the attack software. I just want to stop them from hurting our people. And that's exactly why you're the right person for this job, Hayes replied. You understand that behind all this technology, behind all the strategic implications and geopolitical consequences, there are sailors on ships who are depending on us to keep them safe. As the clock ticked down to the launch of their counter-operation, Sarah received a call that she hadn't expected. It was her father, calling from his retirement home in Arizona. Sarah, honey, I just saw something on the news about increased military readiness in the Pacific. You're not involved in anything dangerous, are you? Sarah looked around at the high-security facility where she was coordinating a cyber warfare operation that could prevent an international conflict, and she almost laughed at the question. Dad, I'm just doing my job. Working with computers, you know. Well, just be careful. I know you're smart and capable, but sometimes these military situations can get complicated quickly. I will, Dad. I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. And Sarah, I'm proud of you. I know I don't say it often enough, but I'm proud of the work you're doing and the person you've become. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. Thanks, Dad. That means everything to me. After ending the call, Sarah sat quietly for a moment, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this point. 6 months ago, she had been the tech support girl who fixed email problems and was dismissed by almost everyone around her. Now she was leading a cyber warfare operation that could determine the outcome of a potential international conflict. But more than that, she had found her place. She was no longer an outsider trying to prove herself. She was part of a team of dedicated professionals who trusted her judgment and relied on her expertise. The military culture that had initially seemed hostile and exclusive had become a community where her skills were valued and her contributions were essential. Lieutenant Commander Torres approached her workstation. Sarah, it's time. All teams are in position, all systems are ready, and all international partners have confirmed their readiness to proceed. Sarah took a deep breath and looked around the operations center. Dozens of military cyber specialists were seated at workstations, each responsible for a different aspect of the operation. Large displays showed the status of various systems and the positions of naval assets around the world. Communication lines were open to fleet commands, intelligence agencies, and international partners. In the center of it all, at the master control station, Sarah Martinez, the girl who had been dismissed as tech support just days earlier, was about to launch the most significant cyber warfare operation in naval history. All right, everyone, she said in her headset, her voice carrying to every workstation in the facility and to coordination centers around the world. This is what we've been preparing for. We have one chance to get this right, and thousands of sailors are depending on us. Let's make sure Operation Darkwater never sees the light of day. She placed her finger on the execution key that would launch their counterattack. Operation Lighthouse is a go. Execute, execute, execute. The operations center fell silent, except for the soft clicking of keyboards and the quiet hum of cooling systems as Operation Lighthouse commenced. Sarah watched the master display screens with intense concentration, monitoring 17 simultaneous cyber attacks across 4 continents as her team executed the most complex offensive operation in cyber warfare history. Target Alpha 7 is down, reported Specialist Morrison from Workstation 3. Server cluster in Romania has been isolated and compromised. Confirming Charlie 4 penetration successful, called out Lieutenant Hayes from across the room. Backdoor access established to their primary command node in Singapore. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard as she monitored the overall operation, coordinating the timing of each attack phase and adjusting tactics in real time based on the defenders' responses. The attackers had built sophisticated defenses around their infrastructure, but they had never anticipated that their own backdoors and vulnerabilities would be used against them with such precision. Sarah, we've got a problem, Commander Torres said urgently from his station. Target Delta 2 is responding faster than expected. They're trying to initiate some kind of emergency protocol. Sarah quickly shifted her attention to the Singapore server cluster, which served as one of the primary coordination points for Operation Darkwater. Her screen showed that the attackers had detected the intrusion and were attempting to trigger their planned operation immediately, 12 hours ahead of schedule. They're trying to jump the timeline, she announced to the room. All teams, accelerate your attack sequences. We need to take down their remaining command nodes before they can coordinate an emergency launch. The tension in the room was palpable as every operator pushed their systems to the limit. Sarah found herself making split-second decisions that could determine the success or failure of the entire operation, coordinating with team members in the facility while maintaining secure communications with international partners in London, Tel Aviv, and Seoul. Target Echo 1 is heavily defended, reported Major Chun from the NSA liaison team. They've activated some kind of adaptive security protocol that's blocking our standard penetration methods. Sarah switched to Major Chin's workstation displays and immediately recognized the defensive pattern. It's not adaptive, it's pre-programmed. They expected someone might use their own techniques against them, so they built in countermeasures. But I've seen this pattern before. She pulled up code analysis from her original investigation, cross-referencing it with the defensive responses they were encountering. Try a modified buffer overflow attack using their own signature patterns. Make your intrusion look like legitimate internal traffic. Within minutes, Major Chun confirmed success. Target Echo 1 is compromised. Their adaptive defenses couldn't distinguish our attack from their own internal communications. But even as they scored victories against individual targets, Sarah could see that the overall battle was far from over. The attackers were responding with increasing sophistication, activating backup systems, and alternative communication pathways that hadn't shown up in her initial analysis. They're smarter than I thought, she muttered to herself as she watched new defensive measures activate in real time. Admiral Richardson, who had been monitoring the operation from the elevated command platform, approached her workstation. "Talk to me, Ms. Martinez. What are we looking at?" "Sir, we're succeeding in disrupting their primary command infrastructure, but they built in more redundancy than I anticipated. They're shifting to backup systems and trying to maintain coordination through alternative channels. We're winning, but they're adapting faster than I hoped." "What do you need?" Sarah studied the evolving tactical situation, her mind racing through possibilities. "I need permission to target civilian infrastructure. Some of their backup systems are running on commercial cloud services and private network providers. Attacking those systems could have collateral effects on civilian users." Admiral Richardson didn't hesitate. "Authorized. Do whatever you need to do to stop them." Sarah nodded and opened new communication channels to her international partners. "All teams, this is Lighthouse Command. Authorization granted for civilian infrastructure targeting. Proceed with Phase 3 operations against commercial cloud targets." The next phase of the operation required even more precise coordination. Attacking commercial systems meant they had to disable the attacker's capabilities while minimizing disruption to legitimate users who shared the same infrastructure. It was like performing surgery with a sledgehammer, requiring techniques that were both powerful and precisely targeted. "Lighthouse Command, this is London Station," came a voice through her encrypted communication system. "We're showing massive defensive activity across European targets. They're throwing everything they have at us. Acknowledged, London. Maintain pressure and watch for cascade failures. If they're pulling resources from other regions to defend Europe, we can exploit weaknesses elsewhere." Sarah's prediction proved accurate. As the attackers concentrated their defenses in Europe, her teams in Asia and North America found sudden openings in previously impenetrable systems. Within an hour, they had successfully compromised 12 of the 17 primary targets and severely degraded the attackers' ability to coordinate Operation Darkwater. But it was at that moment of apparent victory that everything went wrong. "Sarah, we've got a massive problem," Commander Torres called out urgently. "I'm showing activation signals from systems we haven't targeted yet. They're launching Darkwater using backup infrastructure we didn't know existed." Sarah's blood ran cold as her displays suddenly filled with alerts from naval systems around the Pacific. Ships were reporting communication failures, navigation systems were going offline, and weapons targeting computers were experiencing catastrophic malfunctions. Despite their successful attack on the primary command infrastructure, Operation Darkwater was proceeding. "How is this possible?" Admiral Richardson demanded. "I thought you said we had identified all their command systems." "We did identify all the systems we could find," Sarah replied, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she tried to understand what was happening. "But they must have had a completely separate backup network that was isolated from everything we analyzed. They've been planning for exactly this scenario." The main display screens now showed a nightmare scenario unfolding across the Pacific Fleet. Destroyers were losing contact with their escort groups. Submarines were unable to receive updated orders, and carrier groups were operating with severely degraded communications. Most frightening of all, several ships were reporting that their defensive systems had been compromised, leaving them vulnerable to attack. "Ma'am," called out Specialist Rodriguez from the Intelligence Analysis Station, "we're receiving reports that hostile naval forces are moving toward disputed territories in the South China Sea. It looks like they're proceeding with the military operations that were supposed to follow the cyber attack." Sarah realized with growing horror that their partially successful cyber operation had created the worst possible scenario. They had disrupted the attackers' coordination enough to prevent a completely overwhelming cyber assault, but not enough to prevent them from launching their operation. Now American naval forces were facing both cyber warfare and conventional military threats simultaneously, with their systems too compromised to respond effectively. "Admiral," she said, turning to face Admiral Richardson, "I need to try something that's never been attempted before." "What are you thinking?" Sarah pulled up a network diagram that showed both the compromised naval systems and the partially damaged attacker infrastructure. "Instead of trying to clean our systems or finish destroying theirs, I want to try to bridge into their backup network and turn their own attack against them." Admiral Foster, who had been monitoring from his position at the Cyber Command Liaison Station, looked skeptical. "That's incredibly risky. You'd be operating inside hostile systems with no backup and no safe exit strategy. If you're detected, they could trace the connection back to our entire operation." "Sir, with respect, we're already facing the worst-case scenario. Our ships are blind and vulnerable, and hostile forces are moving against American interests. I'd rather take a risk that might save them than play it safe and watch them get destroyed." Sarah turned back to her workstation and began typing rapidly, her code appearing on the displays around the room. "I'm going to use the access we gained to their primary systems as a launching point to probe for their backup network. Once I find it, I could try to inject modified versions of their own malware that will turn their weapons against them." "That's not just risky," Lieutenant Colonel Hayes observed. "That's borderline insane. You're talking about conducting cyber warfare from inside an enemy system while they're actively defending it." "Ma'am, insane problems require insane solutions," Sarah replied without looking up from her keyboard. "And right now, this is our best option for protecting our people." Admiral Richardson made the decision that would define the rest of the operation. "Do it." Sarah took a deep breath and initiated the most dangerous cyber operation of her career. Using the access they had gained to compromise servers in Singapore and Romania, she began probing deeper into the attacker's network, looking for connections to the backup infrastructure that was currently coordinating Operation Darkwater. It was like walking through a minefield in the dark while being hunted by an enemy who knew the terrain better than she did. Every digital step she took could trigger defensive measures that would not only end her mission, but potentially expose the location and capabilities of her entire team. "I'm in," she announced after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. "I found a pathway to their backup command network. I'm seeing the control systems they're using to coordinate the attack on our ships." "Can you stop it?" Admiral Richardson asked. Sarah studied the network architecture she was seeing, mapping the connections and control pathways that were being used to maintain Operation Darkwater. It was elegant in its simplicity and terrifyingly effective in its implementation. "I can do better than stop it," she said quietly. "I can turn it around." Working from inside the enemy's own network, Sarah began one of the most audacious cyber warfare operations ever attempted. Instead of trying to destroy the attacker's capabilities, she began modifying their own attack software, changing target parameters, and rewriting command protocols so that their malware would attack their own systems instead of American naval assets. It was like performing microsurgery while riding a roller coaster during an earthquake, requiring her to modify complex code in real time while avoiding detection by sophisticated defensive systems that were actively hunting for intruders like her. "Sarah, you need to see this," Commander Torres called out urgently. "We're getting reports from Pacific Fleet. Something is happening to the hostile forces systems. Their ships are experiencing the same kinds of failures they were trying to inflict on us." Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she continued working inside the enemy network. "That's because their own attack software is now targeting them instead of us. I've turned Operation Darkwater into a mirror. Everything they were doing to us is now being done to them." But even as she worked to complete the reversal of the cyber attack, Sarah knew that her time was limited. The attackers would eventually detect her presence in their backup network, and when they did, they would cut all connections and potentially trace her activities back to the operations center where she was working. "I need 5 more minutes to complete the protocol reversal," she announced to the room. "But I'm not sure I can stay hidden that long." They're getting suspicious. Admiral Richardson moved to stand directly behind her workstation. "What do you need from us?" "Just keep monitoring the fleet reports, and let me know if the attacks on our ship stop. Once I know the reversal is complete, I can extract from their network, and we'll be done." Sarah had never felt pressure like what she experienced during those final minutes. She was simultaneously monitoring her own activities to avoid detection, modifying complex attack software to reverse its targeting, and coordinating with her team to track the effects of her modifications on both American and hostile forces. "Lighthouse Command, this is Pacific Fleet," came Admiral Chen's voice through the secure communication system. "We're showing massive improvements in our system status. Communications are being restored, navigation systems are coming back online, and defensive capabilities are returning to normal." "Confirmed," added another voice. "Hostile naval forces are reporting system failures and are breaking off their advance toward disputed territories. Whatever you're doing, it's working." Sarah felt a surge of relief and accomplishment as she completed the final modifications to the attack software. Operation Darkwater had been not just stopped, but completely reversed, turning the attackers' own weapons against them and restoring American naval capabilities at the critical moment. "Extraction complete," she announced as she severed her connection to the enemy network and returned to the safety of her own systems. "Operation Darkwater has been terminated and reversed. Our ships are safe, and the hostile forces are dealing with the same system failures they tried to inflict on us." The operations center erupted in quiet but intense celebration as team members confirmed the success of the most complex cyber warfare operation in naval history. They had not just defended against an attack. They had turned it into a victory that would resonate throughout the military and intelligence communities for years to come. But for Sarah Martinez, the girl who had been dismissed as the tech support girl just days earlier, the most meaningful moment came when Admiral Richardson placed his hand on her shoulder and said, "Well done, Ms. Martinez. You just saved the Pacific Fleet." 3 weeks after Operation Lighthouse, Sarah found herself standing in the same Norfolk Naval Base conference room where her journey had begun, but everything about her circumstances had changed. Gone were the dismissive looks and condescending attitudes she had endured for months. Instead, she was surrounded by some of the highest-ranking officers in the Navy, all of whom were treating her with a respect that still felt surreal. Admiral Richardson sat at the head of the conference table, flanked by the other flag officers who had become familiar faces during the crisis. But today there were additional attendees that made Sarah's stomach flutter with nervous energy. The Secretary of the Navy, the Director of the NSA, and, most surprisingly, the Secretary of Defense himself. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Richardson began, "we're here today to conduct an after-action review of Operation Lighthouse and to discuss the implications of what Ms. Martinez and her team accomplished. But first, I want to share some intelligence that puts their achievements in proper context." He activated the room's display system, showing satellite images of naval vessels in various states of distress. These photographs were taken by our intelligence assets in the hours following the reversal of Operation Darkwater. What you're seeing are hostile naval forces that were forced to abandon their military operations and return to port due to the system failures created by Ms. Martinez's cyber counterattack. Sarah studied the images, seeing ships being towed by rescue vessels, others dead in the water with no apparent propulsion, and several that appear to have suffered significant damage to their electronic systems. It was sobering to see the real-world effects of the digital warfare she had conducted from her underground bunker. The Secretary of Defense, a distinguished man in his 60s whose reputation for no-nonsense leadership was legendary, leaned forward in his chair. "Ms. Martinez, I've read the technical reports, but I want to hear directly from you. In your assessment, how significant was the threat posed by Operation Darkwater?" Sarah took a moment to organize her thoughts before responding. "Sir, if the operation had proceeded as planned, it would have rendered the Pacific Fleet operationally ineffective for a minimum of several weeks, possibly months. The attackers had infiltrated every critical system: communications, navigation, weapons targeting, supply chain management, even basic ship operations like power distribution and environmental controls. And the broader implications? The cyber attack was designed to create a window of opportunity for conventional military operations. With our naval forces blind and unable to coordinate effectively, hostile forces could have achieved their territorial objectives in the South China Sea before we could mount an effective response. The strategic balance in the Pacific would have been fundamentally altered. The secretary nodded gravely. And your counter-operation prevented this how? Sarah activated her laptop and connected it to the room's display system. Instead of just defending against their attack, we turned their own weapons against them. By the time Operation Darkwater was supposed to conclude, the hostile forces were experiencing the same system failures they had planned to inflict on us. Their military operations collapsed, and they were forced into a defensive posture. The director of the NSA, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. Ms. Martinez, the techniques you used, particularly the real-time modification of enemy malware from within their own network, represent a significant advance in cyber warfare capabilities. How did you develop these methods? Sarah felt a flush of pride mixed with humility. Sir, it was really a combination of traditional cybersecurity techniques with some unconventional thinking. The key insight was that the attackers had built their network to be resilient against external attacks, but they hadn't considered the possibility of someone operating from within using their own tools and protocols against them. The intelligence community is very interested in these methods, the director continued. We'd like to discuss the possibility of you leading a new cyber warfare development program. Before Sarah could respond, Admiral Richardson held up his hand. With respect to the agency, Ms. Martinez has already accepted a position with the Navy's new Cyber Warfare Excellence Center. She'll be leading our Advanced Threat Analysis Division. Sarah felt a moment of surprise. While she had been told that her status was being upgraded, she hadn't realized the extent of the new responsibilities being offered to her. The Secretary of the Navy, an elegant woman whose background included both military service and private sector leadership, smiled at Sarah's expression. Ms. Martinez, I hope you don't mind that we've been planning your future without consulting you. Given what you've accomplished, we wanted to ensure that your talents are utilized appropriately. No, ma'am, I'm honored by the opportunity. But I want to make sure I understand the scope of what you're asking me to do. Admiral Richardson stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the harbor where ships were going about their normal operations, unaware of how close they had come to disaster. Sarah, what we're asking you to do is build and lead the most advanced cyber warfare capability in the world. You'll have a team of the best analysts and operators we can recruit, unlimited resources, and direct access to intelligence from every agency in the government. You'll also have something else, added the Secretary of Defense. You'll have the complete confidence and support of the senior leadership of this country. What you did during Operation Lighthouse didn't just save ships. It prevented what could have been the opening move of a much larger conflict. Sarah felt the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. 3 weeks ago, she had been fixing printer problems and feeling frustrated by her lack of meaningful work. Now she was being offered the chance to shape the future of cyber warfare at the highest levels of government. There's something else, Admiral Richardson continued. We want to make sure this kind of threat never catches us off guard again. Part of your new role will be to establish early warning systems and threat assessment capabilities that can detect and analyze emerging cyber threats before they reach operational status. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the conference room door. Commander Wells entered, carrying a folder marked with the highest classification levels. Admiral, excuse the interruption, but you asked me to bring you the latest intelligence reports immediately when they arrived. Admiral Richardson opened the folder and read quickly, his expression growing more serious. This is from our assets in the field. The hostile forces responsible for Operation Darkwater have been conducting a comprehensive review of what went wrong. They're trying to understand how their operation was not just defeated, but turned against them. He looked directly at Sarah. According to our sources, they've concluded that they were facing capabilities they didn't know existed. They're now investing heavily in new defensive measures and reconsidering their entire approach to cyber warfare. Sarah felt a complex mix of pride and concern. So we've changed the game, but we've also escalated it. Exactly, the Secretary of Defense replied, which is why your new role is so critical. We need to stay ahead of their adaptations and continue developing capabilities they can't anticipate or counter. The meeting continued for another hour, covering the technical details of Sarah's future work, the resources that would be available to her, and the expectations for her new role. But as the discussion progressed, Sarah found herself thinking about the personal journey that had brought her to this point. 6 months ago, she had been a young woman with impressive technical credentials who felt like she was wasting her potential fixing routine problems. She had been dismissed, underestimated, and treated as an afterthought by almost everyone around her. The transformation from tech support girl to cyber warfare leader seemed almost impossible to believe. As the meeting concluded and the various officials began to leave, Admiral Richardson asked Sarah to remain behind. When they were alone, he returned to his position at the window, watching the harbor activities. "Sarah, I want you to understand something," he said quietly. "What happened during Operation Lighthouse wasn't just about technical skills or cyber warfare capabilities. It was about character, determination, and the ability to perform under pressure when everything was on the line." "Thank you, sir, but I had a lot of help. The whole team contributed to the success." "Yes, they did. But you were the one who saw the patterns that others missed. You were the one who insisted on investigating threats that others dismissed. And you were the one who was willing to take personal risks to protect people you've never met." Admiral Richardson turned to face her. Those qualities, the ability to see what others miss, the determination to pursue what you believe is right, and the courage to act when action is required, those are the qualities we need in our leaders. Technical skills can be taught, but character is something you either have or you don't. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Sir, for months I felt like I was invisible, like my work didn't matter. I was starting to wonder if I'd made the wrong choice in wanting to serve." And now, Sarah looked around the conference room, where she had first learned about Operation Darkwater, thinking about everything that had happened since that first emergency meeting. "Now I understand that sometimes you have to prove yourself in ways you never expected. And sometimes the most important work happens when nobody's watching." Admiral Richardson smiled. "There's one more thing I want to share with you before you start your new position. Do you remember Lieutenant Commander Harrison?" Sarah nodded, recalling the officer who had dismissed her as the tech support girl in the hallway outside this very room. "He requested a meeting with me yesterday. He wanted to personally apologize for his treatment of you and to ask if there was any way he could work with your new cyber warfare team. It seems he's developed a deep appreciation for the importance of cybersecurity." Sarah couldn't help but smile at the irony. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that would be entirely up to you. You're going to be building this program from the ground up, and you'll have complete authority over staffing decisions." As Sarah prepared to leave the conference room and begin her new role, she reflected on the lessons of the past few weeks. She had learned that expertise and dedication could overcome prejudice and dismissal, but only if you were willing to persist when things seemed hopeless. She had learned that the most important battles sometimes happened in the background, where the consequences of failure were enormous, but the opportunities for recognition were minimal. Most importantly, she had learned that her childhood dream of using her skills to serve something larger than herself wasn't naive or unrealistic. It was exactly what her country needed from her. As she walked through the corridors of the naval base, Sarah noticed that people looked at her differently now. Officers nodded respectfully, enlisted personnel offered genuine smiles, and conversations stopped when she passed by, not because people were talking about her, but because they wanted to hear what she might say. The transformation was complete, but Sarah understood that it wasn't really about how others saw her. It was about how she saw herself and her purpose. She was no longer the tech support girl who fixed email problems. She was Sarah Martinez, cyber warfare specialist, leader of the Navy's most advanced threat analysis division, and the person who had prevented a military catastrophe through skill, determination, and courage. But more than any title or position, she was someone who had found her calling and was ready to dedicate her career to protecting the people who serve their country in harm's way. And as she settled into her new office, a spacious facility on the top floor with windows overlooking the harbor, Sarah smiled at the thought that the best part of her story was just beginning. 2 months later, Sarah would find herself in another conference room, briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff on a new threat her team had identified. 6 months after that, she would be testifying before Congress about the nation's cyber warfare capabilities. A year later, she would be promoted to a position that made her one of the youngest senior officials in the Department of Defense. But she would always remember the moment when Admiral Richardson had called her into his office and trusted her with the most important work of her life. And she would always remember that sometimes the most significant victories come not from being recognized for what you can do, but from proving to yourself that you can do whatever is necessary to protect the people who matter most. The girl they had once dismissed as tech support had become the woman 4 admirals would salute with genuine respect and admiration, not because of her rank or position, but because of what she had accomplished when everything was on the line.